there is a misunderstanding internationally that people who live in Bahrain or the Gulf in general are very well off, are very rich, don't have any problems, and that is very far from the truth. People in Bahrain and also other Gulf countries do actually suffer from poverty. They do suffer from unemployment. There's a problem with inequality when it comes to jobs, when it comes to opportunities, and so on. But even more so than that, what it comes down to is dignity. The fact that when you live in places like Bahrain, you are stripped of your dignity as a human being. And when you live without dignity, there's always going to be a time when people have enough and decide that they want to create change because they want to have their dignity back. We currently have more than 3,000 political prisoners in Bahrain, and it's important to mention that the Bahraini population is less than 1 million people. So if you think about it per capita, it's actually one of the highest percentages in the region of political prisoners. Well, my father is a human rights defender. He's been a human rights defender for as long as I can remember, and this is why he's in prison, serving a life sentence in Bahrain. He has been on several hunger strikes because to him as a human rights activist, you never stop being an activist. And so when he got stripped of all of his tools as an activist, he uses his body as the last tool of protest. And so he's been on numerous hunger strikes. The longest one was 110 days to protest different things like, continued incarceration, unfair and arbitrary detention, torture, and so on. He was severely tortured when he was first arrested. And so he does these hunger strikes as his way of protesting against the ongoing human rights violations in the country. He's someone who is an international human rights activist. Before he was arrested, he was working for an international human rights organization. We have several people in Bahrain who have been arrested and put in prison for using social media like Twitter. Nabeel Rajab has been charged 3 times now with the use of Twitter. He's been to prison already 2 years, and now he's in prison again, facing charges for insulting the Ministry of Interior and the military. And this is all because of 140 characters on Twitter. Basically, there is no freedom of expression in Bahrain. There is no freedom of opinion. You're not allowed to say what you think or criticize the government, whether it's on Twitter or otherwise. And you can go to prison. If you insult the king, for example, in Bahrain, you can go to prison for up to 7 years. For writing one tweet about the King of Bahrain. Every day there's protests still, almost every day there's protests in Bahrain since the beginning in 2011. People continue to protest despite everything, despite the lack of international attention, despite of the lack of international accountability. The Bahraini government has been able to get away with pretty much everything they've done because they're friends with the West, because they're friends with the EU, because they're friends with the United States, and especially because they're friends with the United Kingdom. This has meant that when other people are held accountable, the Bahraini government is not. And unfortunately, this means that we get to a point where we realize that with Bahrain, it's not just an uphill struggle, it's an up-mountain struggle, where we know it's going to take a very long time for us to create the democratic change that we seek. Well, of course, I know that a lot of people know Bahrain for the Formula One race. What I think is important to bring up is that the Formula One race in Bahrain actually causes human rights violations. There are people who argue that you cannot ask that the Formula One be cancelled because of human rights, because if you link sporting events with human rights, then you can't really host it in most countries around the world. But with Bahrain, it's not just that they're hosting it in a country that commits human rights violations, it's that the race itself causes human rights violations. There are people who get arrested before, during, and after the race, linked to the race. We've had people arrested at the Formula One racetrack and tortured and then sentenced to prison terms, women who have been arrested. We've had people killed during protests against the Formula One race. We've had Formula One employees arrested and beaten inside the Formula One headquarters in 2011. And yet the race still happens. So I think it's always a good question to ask, at what cost? Yes, we need the media attention that comes with the Formula One race, but at what cost? Should it be at the cost of people giving up their lives or giving up their livelihoods or going to prison so that we can get some media attention on the human rights situation?